So if you're watching YouTube right now for Diablo 4 content, you're seeing a lot of the same type of videos going around talking about what they really think about Diablo 4, what their thoughts are, what their concerns are for the game, how the game could change. And out of all the videos I watch, I think the best one is the one Kripp made. I think this is probably the most comprehensive out of all of them. And yeah, I think there are some genuine issues. So here are my thoughts on some of the topics that he went over. Sit in and enjoy. Let's see what Kripp has to say about Diablo 4 in this video. It just came up on my algorithm about an hour ago.
Here. Today I want to go over all the major issues that I have experienced in Diablo 4 so far, and before we get into the gritty part of that, I very much like Diablo 4. I think it is a very solid game. I've been streaming it all day. I'm still streaming it all day. If you want to come and check out the stream, I would appreciate it. You would probably appreciate the content because, well, a lot of people seem to say that. It is a game that I think can be very good in the future, but I think it is pretty underbaked on launch.
It's very packed at launch, but it's also not packed at the same time. It's packed in the sense that if you're doing the campaign and you're going through the story and you're doing Lilith altars, it feels like there's a lot going on. But once you hit the end game at level 50, from basically Torment 3 all the way to Torment 4, all the way to level 100, it's the exact same game. There's no changes, nothing really big happens. Not to mention your character doesn't actually have any changes in terms of how it plays. It literally plays the same the whole way through. I feel like if you stop the game around level 40 or like 35 even, that's pretty much it. That's your character. Paragon offers power. A lot of the utility is just resource reduction or resource like cooldowns, or defense. Like, it's just three things. It's either power, utility, or defense. Your skill doesn't change. You're still using the same skill. A lot of the grind is pretty monotonous, and it feels pretty bad when the level scaling starts to really kick in. You know, at first I was very optimistic about the level scaling, but eventually I realized, hey, the level scaling is not that great. Like the Paragon power spike that you get, or the level 70 power spike that you get going up to Ancestral gear, that kind of wears off after a little bit. So it has these weird valleys where you peak at certain levels, like at level 50 when you get Sacred gear, you're power spiking. But then the scaling kind of catches up to you, and then at level 70 you power spike again. But then the scaling catches up to you again. So let's see what Kripp has to say.
With that said, they have played a very active role in making improvements even post-launch, which has certainly surprised me. I thought the game was far rougher in the first time that we played it in that beta weekend compared to the Server Slam patch. They're really working on it, it seems. So even though I think this video that I'm making on this day is completely fair, of criticism to what's happening in Diablo 4, I do suspect that these issues would at least be addressed in part. It seems like pretty soon, rather sooner than later. So let's get into it. First off, I want to talk about the basics of defense and offense. The main defensive mechanics are armor and resistances, and I made an entire video on this that go over how these systems basically don't work at all. You have the armor system that is completely busted. Everyone is getting more damage reduction from just having gear equipped than stacking any levels of resistances.
Yeah, the resistance calculation's a little off. I don't know why they do it the way they did, but armor gives you way more resistance than resistance itself, which I think it makes no sense.
Armor is super broken, and resistance every single resistance is the worst stat on your gear. Every single Paragon point with the resistance is the worst Paragon point on your tree. It's better to get like 5 dexterity than 2 all resist on your Paragon board. Now that might seem pretty crazy, but we've done the numbers and it's true, and that's in a prior video you might want to check out. And the other part about defenses that I feel is way out of line is the unstoppable mechanic. The unstoppable mechanic is one you might encounter if you constantly crowd control enemies in the game. It basically gives them a short window of immune to crowd control effects. Now this unstoppable aspect, it can be given to some abilities for the various characters in the game, and the monsters on the high end of the game have incredibly severe and punishing crowd controlling mechanics.
Yeah, I started noticing this around, I think, Torment 20 plus, like 21 and up. I realized, like, if my shouts are down as Barbarian, I'm basically dead. Like, you just can't play the game. The CC is out of control. You're just frozen or stunned almost all the time. And I think the only reason I'm able to even play as a melee class is because the Barbarian shouts just come with CC immunity. You either have to blow up the mobs off screen, or you have to play some sort of build like Pulverize, where you one-shot the mobs, and the mobs can't really react to you. Because if they react to you, you're CC'd, and you're basically dead.
So characters that have the ability to, well, completely ignore them are basically the good ones. Barbarians can have nearly permanent unstoppable, druids can have nearly permanent unstoppable, and probably by no coincidence, those are the top 2 classes in the game. And rogue also kind of hits that list, and rogue is also pretty good at dodging crowd control mechanics, generally because of the speed and maneuverability. The idea that the entire difficulty of the endgame is based around crowd control, but you have entire classes that can ignore all the crowd control all the time, is kind of insane to me. The other thing is,
I think the D4 mechanics, the systems, are just really too simple. Like, every class having access to vulnerability, every class having access to the exact same thing, where the gameplay style is build resource, dump resource. It's just a very simple game at the end of the day. The fact that resistances don't work, like, all you have to do is stack armor. It's just, the entire game is built for this very casual audience, and I think a lot of people are going to enjoy Diablo 4, because the majority of people that play Diablo 4, they're never going to see the end game. Like, the people that are level 70 plus, level 80 plus, like, today, you are in the minority, and that is, like, you are not the target market for Blizzard. Blizzard's not trying to sell you, like, skins that duke out your character. Like, I just don't think, like, any hardcore players, like, we're really not the target audience. And I think we have to accept it. This is not PoE. PoE's over there. I think that's the reality we have to face for D4. Unless they do some sweeping changes, but that means, like, changing entire underlying systems in Diablo 4.
It's not all that fun to deal with those mechanics. It's not all that fun to play a character with no crowd control breaks. Trust me, okay?
It's not even that fun playing a character with crowd control breaks. Like, I'm playing Barbarian, and the hardest part of the gameplay is keeping awake. Like, half the time I'm yawning.
So I don't know how they're going to tackle this, but I think unstoppable effects are completely busted and don't belong in the game as far as like a permanent aspect. The sorcerer has really powerful CC breaks, but doesn't have crowd control immunity unless you invest in it with several legendary aspects. I think that's a fair way to go about it, but it's really going to require some class redesign. From an offensive perspective, cooldown reduction is just completely insane. It's really hard to call it anything but that. Cooldown reduction is so much the best stat on, I believe, all characters except for some rogue builds. Some rogue builds, actually, it is the best stat, but for more attack-based, fast attack speed-based rogue builds, it's not quite as important. For everything else in the game, it's the number one stat, at least by a factor of 2. You would rather have the cooldown reduction stat rather than any 2 other stats on any piece of gear.
That is crazy to me, and I feel like having it on Helm and Amulet, like, just those 2, is, I feel like it's too much. Like, it should have just been on Helm, honestly. I feel like the whole game, all your big spells are these cooldowns, and getting access to them faster, and then having cooldown reduction aspects or cooldown reduction points on the Paragon board is just really strong, because the reality is you have this percentage cooldown, and the more you get of it, the flat cooldown reduction effects take it to the moon. And that's why you have Barbarians with perma-shout uptime and all these broken things.
So that is kind of ridiculous. I think they should consider putting cooldown reduction on the Paragon tree and not having it on gear at all.
I think that's fair. I think that's a fair assessment. It's just too strong on two pieces. Like you just have almost half the cooldown as anyone else without it. And so some of the ultimates, I feel like the problem is that a lot of the ultimates are very lackluster. So you need the cooldown reduction to make them like seem even worthwhile to use. And some builds drop ultimates altogether. Like they just don't use their ultimate.
So you can spec into it, and the Paragon tree has a lot of customizability left. There's a whole lot of 5 dexterity points on it still. Keep that in mind. The other aspect has to do with how you actually do damage in the game. I made a video talking about the damage buckets, and they were largely theorized at that point. Now that the game has come out, the damage buckets are any form of increased damage, vulnerable damage, and critting. So this basically means that if your character doesn't have a reliable source of vulnerable damage, it is a bad character. If your character doesn't scale crit, it is probably, except for like 2 builds, a bad character. This is insanely simplistic and not interesting to me. There's a lot of aspects to Diablo 4 that are surprisingly well balanced. In fact, the sorcerer class as a whole is surprisingly well balanced. If you choose the route of fire, lightning, or ice, all 3 builds actually do pretty similar damage using varying mechanics.
Well, that's cool to hear, because the barbarian build is just literally whirlwind and maybe bleed, but it's just majority whirlwind. I feel like it just does way too much for the medium amount of investment.
In fact, so some aspects of the game are unbelievably well tuned, while others are just simplistic and have bare bone requirements like the overall damaging system of the character. In terms of damage, I'm also finding that range damage is just crazy. When I've done the higher level Nightmare Sigils, I have opened a door and instantly one-shot off screen from like a corpse bow.
That reminded me of earlier. We were doing a nightmare dungeon, and we had a necromancer come join us. And we're like 10 levels below the nightmare dungeon, and then the necro is 20 levels below, and he was just getting blasted left and right by the weakest trash mob in the dungeon, the corpse bow archer, the skeleton with the bow and arrow, and it just went, and it's just gone. He was just gone. It was we spent half the run just rezzing him. Poor guy. It's range damage is too high, and I feel like it's when you stack these affixes, you're only thinking about close enemy because you're close to them, so you kind of ignore like the reduction to range damage. But even with like another 20% to range damage reduction is just so much damage coming in. Like playing a class, I feel like if I don't have a 50% reduction, like damage reduction shout up, I'm good as dead. Like I'm just gonna run away.
Okay, you can't do much to do that. You're literally dying in one hit from monsters you can't see.
I thought this was a problem with my build or my character. I thought I was building it wrong, but it's good to hear it from Kripp's point of view, because I felt like my character was squishy at some points. And the only points where I feel like I wasn't squishy was when I hit the certain power spikes. When I hit 70 and I finally got my first ancestral weapon, and then I juiced it up and I was able to blow through mobs before they could blow me up. So it was like basically your best defense was just build an insane offense.
In other cases, range damage is really crazy, and you can't really mitigate it by resists. Resistances don't scale. You get like 50 cold resist, your cold damage reduction goes up by 2%. Resistances are such a joke, and I think when they tackle that, and not if, when, because that system is laughably bad.
Half the game's defenses just don't work. You're just better off stacking armor, and unfortunately that's how the game is played. And they need to change it. Like, we have all these interesting stats, and it ends up being, hey, is it armor? Good. Is it main stat? I guess. Is it vulnerable damage? Okay. Is it crit damage? Yeah. Otherwise, dump it. It's useless. I mean, other than cooldown on helmet amulet and resource on your rings, like, and then maybe resource reduction, but everything else like does not matter. It's just a whole bunch of hoopla. The fact that like if you just roll cooldown on helmet amulet, your whole build just works 50 times better than anything else you do to your character is kind of ridiculous. I think a lot of the stats in Diablo 4 are just very, very fluff.
This might alleviate a little bit. The other aspect of this is boss damage is a joke. The bosses are kind of just damage sponges. When I say that, like, there's white mobs, archers in the maps that hit you and almost one-shot you, yeah, there's no boss that, like, really one-shots you.
Yeah, I noticed that too when I was playing. I was able to tank the boss's hits. Like, this huge Giga Chad monster shows up at the end of the map, end of the dungeon, and they're about to slam you. There's this indicator that basically that tells you, hey, dodge this, doesn't matter, stand in it, get hit. Whereas you enter a dungeon and that white mob with a bow shoots an arrow at you that you can barely see. That little needle pinpoint is gonna fucking blow your character up. But that huge slam from the boss, it's not gonna do anything. It's so crazy.
Scaling mechanics of bosses is hilarious. Bosses are often the least dangerous mobs in the entire dungeon. I don't know how that ended up that way. Speaking of dungeon,
I think at first when you were leveling up before hitting endgame, some of the bosses did do a lot of damage, but at some point the scaling is really off. I think a lot of the scaling's off. I don't know if the devs just didn't have time to actually play the game to test it at the higher ends. Like, they probably spent a majority of their time testing for the casual audience, which I think is the overarching theme here. And we just can't be... I think we have to accept it. Like, otherwise we're just gonna get angrier and angrier. Like, I've come to terms with it. If I haven't, you would have seen like 18 videos from me. Like, I posted a video about a few days ago where I talked about how a lot of the hardcore no-lifers are already running into the problems and the casual players are brushing it off and they don't want to hear it. Where I'm saying these problems, you're going to run into them as a casual player. And at that point I said, hey, I'm not going to make all these negative videos. I'm going to let people enjoy their honeymoon. But I think it's time. I think a lot of the casual players, like, you have your chance. I think here comes the shitstorm. And then you just gotta embrace it, like how we're gonna embrace that this is a casual game.
You're gonna have to do a lot of them. Originally, they stated that the average player will take about 150 hours to hit level 100. I don't know how they came to this figure, because I guess I just suck at the game. I mean, maybe I'll hit it under 150, but...
No, you don't suck at the game. I think the group leveling, the race to 100 threw off expectations. The average player is not going to play like Woody Joe. Like, I don't know why, like, people would think that they're able to play at that level. That they think that, oh, he's playing the rogue. If you watch this gameplay on his rogue, for hitting World First solo 100, not group 100, that's I'm just going to mentally compartment it. Separate that. But group 100, like, they're doing maximum group content. You as a solo player, you're not gonna hit that anytime soon. Like, I've been grinding nightmare dungeons. I've been trying to level up in like what I believe is how Blizzard expects us to level, not running between Champion's Demise and the two best dungeons in the game, but just going through nightmare dungeons, teleporting to them. Like, it's taking such a long time, and it's such a time sink. And I feel like 150 hours of non-stop gameplay, of super optimized gameplay, it might be like an exponentiated number. I don't think it was a fully tested number. I don't think a single dev sat down and actually went through the whole process. It's not feasible to expect them to do so. They have so many other duties for Diablo 4.
That is really generous. Leveling is incredibly slow after level 50. And it is a system where the levels come so slowly that it does feel incredibly grindy. It is a super grindy game. Now, you may have seen players in like group play level way faster. We had people getting max level in the first few days. Like, Kripp, what are you talking about? So these players, and like one of them even went over their vlog on this, like Zizaran, for example, if you want to check out his vlog on it. So basically, they had a full group doing split farm. So they do a dungeon that has many different avenues when the dungeon starts, and each player does one separate part of the dungeon, and they get experience has an infinite range in Diablo 4. So they're literally getting 3 to 4 times the experience, but when they leave the dungeon, they can just reform the group, which resets it rather than having to wait a minute. And just constantly doing a dungeon gives you insane experience compared to just walking around the world and doing, well, a lot of nothing in between. So they also skipped doing like nightmare sigils, nightmare dungeons. They didn't have leveled glyphs. They basically had really crappy characters. They could barely even play the game, but they leveled up really quickly. So I want to mention that because some people will think it's like, hey, you can get to max level in like 3 days.
It's like trying to do Torment 4 when you're like a level 60 or a level 50 character and you have no ancestral gear. You're gonna feel a lot weaker, and Zizarian actually mentioned how his level 100 character is basically bricked by the way he's leveling, because he doesn't have the glyphs and he doesn't have that power level that everyone else has. If you were to level via nightmare dungeons using nightmare sigils, which kind of sucks. But if you're finding yourself playing a character that is basically what you call, I guess what I would call like soft bricked, and you're like, oh, I need gold, I need resources, respec, you can actually craft nightmare sigils that are much lower in tier, and the mobs inside that dungeon are going to be at a much lower level. So you can test builds, you can do all types of things in those dungeons. You're not completely out of options. Like if you're out of gold to respec, because boy, oh boy, at level 80, it takes about over 1 million gold to respec your tree. That's a lot of gold. And I can't imagine how much it would cost to respec your Paragon board. Not to mention the amount of clicking that you have to do on the Paragon board. I did not find a button to respec all for Paragon board, so I assume you have to do it one at a time. And I do not look forward to respecing my Paragon board. I'm at the point where I will probably level a brand new character to try different builds, then respec my Paragon board. That's just how tedious how I see it. And at that point, I might as well just play a new class. Like, why would I level the same character again? You know?
No, you can't. Okay? The circumstances for doing that were so extreme. They used methods that have been nerfed. I don't want to say exploit. You know, I don't think anything they did was exploitive.
Yeah, I don't agree with people calling it exploit. Like leaving dungeons, resetting dungeons, that's basically what you do in every other game like this. It's just unfortunate that there's a solo timer, but Zizarian even mentioned that there were another dungeon right next to it. By the time you finish that dungeon, you could just come back to Champion's Demise. Like anyone could have done it. I think the amount, and I feel like saying that the leveling doesn't take long, you're really downplaying like the skill level of the actual racers. Like if you think you can do that, I feel like make a YouTube video show that you can do it in like the same amount of time that they did. But again, like some of the methods are nerfed, and if that's going to be the cop out, then that's going to be what it is. But the amount, like the playstyle, the consistency that they had over that long period of time is not anything to like scoff at. Like the world first players, like they're world first for a reason, and we're not. You know, you just have to respect that fact.
They operated within the game mechanics, but they also used leveling strategies and certain dungeons that have been nerfed immediately after they used them. So if they had to do it all over again, I don't even think they could do it as fast as they did, even with the experience they gained in the meantime. That's just how it works. Overall, it will take a player hundreds of hours to get to level 100, which makes the actual launch of Season 1 really questionable.
And the fact that they just nerfed things as it was going, I find that very strange to nerf things as it was live. Not to mention, like, to nerf things after people already took advantage of, right? So the Barbarian Bracers is the like prime example. The Barbarians that got it at first, they were able to blow through mobs, and they had hours upon hours of going through the game with it. Same thing with the Shout Bracers pre-nerf. Meanwhile, anyone else that got it, you know, like after nerf, we didn't get to, you know, basically do that. And I think that's really weird that you would do that like a day or two into the race while like people are being affected by it. instead of letting everybody else like play on the same level. Because now you have like this part of the leveling experience that was OP with the OP item, and then this part isn't. But then everybody else, this part is dragged all the way out. Like it just feels so bad. Same thing with the dungeons getting nerfed. Like other people are like, oh wow, they were able to get experience with that dungeon. Like it just kind of sucks all around. I think more diligence needs to be done prior. Maybe this is what this whole season 0 is like. They throw out this race to try to catch all the OP stuff that they didn't catch in beta, because it's a much bigger net. Like more stakes are on the line, and also the beta only went up to 25, so this lets them really catch everything and nerf things accordingly, which I think is fair. It is what it is. The nerfs are out. Like everything is like basically swept under the rug. Season 1's gonna come, and we're gonna have to see what season 1 is like. I think I'm probably not going to take season 1 serious. I'm going to play it much casually, trying to play a hardcore, trying to race and skip everything. I feel like the first half of the story I was going through, I didn't really enjoy like having that pressure. So I realized like I'm not a racer, so I'm just not gonna do it myself. I'm just gonna play at a much more casual level and see what season 1 has to offer. If there's nothing it offers, I might just stay in Eternal. Like, screw it.
Keep in mind, they said that season 1 is coming like mid-July. We're already a week into the game right now, and
I mentioned this before, how even though Diablo 4, like even if it came out yesterday, it feels like this game's been out for months because of the amount of time we're like spending on it. And that may be just me and a select crowd, whereas the majority of players are like, they barely got to play and they love it. And that's totally fine. Like these videos, like they're for you in a week. Like you're reading it, like it's not trying to rain on. We're not saying Act 1 is terrible, you should quit the game right now. That's not what we're saying. We're saying these are very real issues, and whether you care about them right now or not, you're going to be someone that cares about them a week down the line.
There's a lot of people that are barely over level 50. They're going to drop the season 1, and a lot of people are going to have characters that are like level 70 or 80, and they haven't even gotten like all the Lilith shrines or like the renowned things. And
I'm really curious what it's going to be like when they drop season 1, and a lot of these players are like, what, you have to start from 1 again? It's going to be a shock, but this is the way these seasonal games work. Like you restart your progress, and you're gonna be doing Lilith shrines all over again, probably. I actually don't know, but you know, you're gonna start from scratch again. So just mentally prepare yourself for that. Like whatever you do to grind now, you're not gonna carry that over to season 1.
And these people are gonna be thinking to themselves like, wait, I don't want to have to do all of this all over again. It doesn't make sense to me. I think they either like last minute nerfed experience rates or something, because the launch of Season 1 is even more bizarre in its timing, given how grindy, insanely grindy the game is. And with that said, I have been playing Solo Self-Found and really enjoying it, so it is a grindy game, but I also enjoy playing Ruthless in Path of Exile, so it does work for some people. It is not necessarily a disadvantage, but Diablo has always excelled from mass appeal more so than niche communities. Again,
like I said, it's they're going for the casuals for this market, and if you're not, you know, if the game's not really for you, then you're probably not a casual. Congratulations, you graduated from casual.
Be mindful of that. The other part I want to talk about is the extremely poor quality of life for inventory management and stash tabs.
Oh my god, 4 tabs is not enough, and the gems are, they only go up to 50. Like the stacks of gems, each stack only goes up to 50. Like I'm already at the point where I have 2 stacks of certain gems because I have more than 50 of them, and I have to craft them up, which then eats my gold, and you know, I kind of want to use my gold for other stuff. But I'm at the point where like I'm probably just not gonna pick anything up ever unless it's the vendor.
It is really insane here. Like, the maximum stash tabs you can have is 4.
Oh, the sigils.
Which I do have.
There's so many sigils. Like, I dismantle my sigil like after every few runs because there's just so many that drop, which is a good thing. But I kind of wish they were weighted towards whichever dungeon you were running. Like if I'm running Zenith, I would like more Zeniths to drop. Whereas I feel like I run Zenith, or if I run the slums, then I maybe I'll get one slum in like 3 runs or something. I just want to run that dungeon. I kind of, I don't really care about these other dungeons, and there are some dungeons that are really bad. Like if you run a few nightmare dungeons, you're gonna mentally make a note like, oh, this dungeon's terrible. I never want to touch this dungeon ever again. Like Witchwater for me, like I dismantle that on the spot. Conclave is one of them. Like I just, some dungeons are good and some aren't not good. And you guys are gonna find that out real quick.
I have an entire stash tab for nightmare sigils. Yes, you can like disenchant them and stuff, but you can't like destroy one and make another one. It's like crafting cards in Hearthstone. You have to delete like 10 of them to make one. So you can't really do that. You have to run them. And the most effective way to run them is to do the same. Like I have 2 Zeniths here. So you want to get like 3, 4, 5 Zeniths, walk to the dungeon, and then just chain them. So you actually need a lot of space in your inventory. Now it has a sorting function, but the sorting function only works one way.
The sort is so bad. Like it only sorts tier. So like I'll put your lowest tier at the bottom right and the highest tier in the top left. Heaven forbid you have a Zenith over here and then a Zenith tier 25 and a Zenith tier 22, but you kind of want to run both the Zeniths. You're gonna have to manually eyeball all the ones that look like this blue little Goza doll or whatever, the Russian doll, and just pray to heaven that you can like pick out all the Zeniths together and then put it in your inventory somewhere, because it is not it. Like the sort, I don't know why there's only one sort feature and there's not like a filter, there's not a search, like there's nothing. The sort, I think, is one of the weakest parts of the management system. It's a quality of life I feel like Blizzard should have mastered at this point, with how many years of Diablo 3, how many years of World of Warcraft, how many years of all the other game design that you have under your belt. I feel like this should not have happened, especially as, you are what people look at, like when it comes to like industry experience. Like you're a company that's been around for a long time. I mean, to be fair, a lot of the original designers for a lot of the games we love are no longer at Blizzard, so maybe they're just taking in all the new blood.
And I actually don't know what way that is, because like I don't know, let's see here. So there's a Zenith here, and there's the Zenith here, and was it 2 Zeniths? Yeah, Zenith there, Zenith there, Zenith there. And there's no search, I can't type anything in. The fact that it takes up one of my maximum 4 stash tabs is mind-blowingly bad. And I have to literally hover over every single one instead of running across the world for every single sigil that I do. I have to do this. Also, for consumables, they take up the same space as the elixirs. That's another half of my stash tabs, and I've actually stopped picking up the lower tier elixirs. If you want to like stash some legendary powers, you have to mouse over every single one to find the one that you stashed for later.
It's also a part of my gripe with the aspect system, like the fact that the same aspect can drop on so many pieces. I guess it's good for flexibility for making your build, but I don't care that it can drop on gloves, boots, and rings. Like, that's just additional items that I have to manually sort through. It's a lot of friction. And at the end of the day, I think friction sums up the term really well. Like, there's friction from just doing things in the game that should be, like, a fun process. It's just a lot of anti-fun in the game. Friction of going through the town, running from one side of the town to the other just to do very simple things. Friction going to your nightmare dungeon, like there's no teleport to the nightmare dungeon. Friction of manually checking your uniques that you have stashed away. Friction in that the sorting doesn't really do a good job. Friction in a lot of the sigils that drop. There's no filter feature to look for the affixes that you want. There's just a lot of friction, and it sounds like complaints, but I feel like we shouldn't have these complaints. This is stuff that shouldn't exist in a Diablo game. I don't know. Yeah, they make all these complicated things, but I feel like there's probably a better way about it.
The actual quality of life of moving items in and out and managing this system is so hilariously bad, but at the same time, it is painful. It is horrible to go through it.
Some people watching this probably think, hey, Kripp is shitting on the game and I'm shitting along with him, and we're holding hands while we shit, and then I hand him the toilet paper at the end. No, these are genuine concerns, and if they don't fix these things, like I said, you're going to get sick of it yourself. I don't see how you can disagree with anything that is said in this video so far. Like, unless you literally are still in Act 1 after a week of playing, you're gonna run into these systems by now, and these systems are going to you're going to see the friction, or you're gonna feel the weight, as PoE players say.
I also want to mention, since we're looking at them, while the Nightmare Sigil system itself is quite interesting, like once you're in the dungeon, it's pretty cool. Managing them is horrible. Yeah. Having to run to each one is horrible. If you click on a Nightmare Sigil and then instantly press your map key, it actually does go to where the dungeon is, but you have to learn to time it. Some people probably don't even know that. But the Nightmare Sigil, it goes away if you log out. So if you trigger a Nightmare Sigil, and you log out or disconnect or crash, or maybe they have a maintenance patch or you lag out, your sigil is completely gone. For most low-level sigils, this won't really matter very much, but it does actually take quite a commitment to scale up into the higher level Nightmare Sigils. So losing one of those because you disconnected or lagged or anything like that is crazy. And the same applies to elixirs. If you log out and back in, it doesn't matter how much time your elixir had on it, it goes away. So these mechanics are just like really bizarre to me. One other part that I really don't like about the game is the gear categories. Most ARPGs have a type of gear where you have a category kind of like a cloth armor, so it might have a lower strength requirement to equip, but the cloth armor will have a lower armor value. Basically, if you want to be a beefy plate-wearing juggernaut, well, you can do that, but you're going to need a lot of strength. You're going to need other requirements.
Yeah, there's no requirements for gear in this game. It's just your class can wield it or it can't, and that's it. And I think it's kind of weird, because there's no stat allocation like in the game. For your character, your stats is whatever your gear comes with. You can't pick and choose to put stats in there, like old Diablo games. I guess it's like an older feature. The only requirement is based on level. Like if you hit the level that can use it and it's for your class, then you can just equip it, and that's it. And I think the Paragon system could potentially make that interesting, right? Because you're picking all these points, and your glyphs have these requirements, which is pretty cool. But I think it's just something about the gear where you put a lot of points into a specific stat just to wear a piece of gear. I think it's a cool thing that that flavor is now forever gone, which kind of sucks.
In Diablo 4, the way it works is every single slot has an armor value that scales with its item power. And if
yeah, the armor, again, it's back to armor, and they're trying to make armor the most simplistic thing. Whereas if you have cloth armor on squishy classes, you can make up for it by having higher resistance. You could have like more stats, like you could do all these unique things, all these cool things with defenses. You can have layered defenses. Look at Path of Exile, how they do it. You have armor, you have energy shield, and you have evasion. It's three things, and then like ward is like the weird stepbrother that no one talks to or whatever. So you have like these three defenses, and they each do something different, and it's just three things, but it's unique, and then you can have a mix of the two. You can have armor and evasion. You can build those two, right? But mostly you just stack one and you call it a day. But here it's just armor, and for some reason, some genius decided armor should give resistance. Look, we already have resistance on rings and amulet. Like, we have so much resistance there. If you just make those resistances actually work, armor wouldn't be such a big deal. And I feel like, the stats that comes with higher eye level gear already, like, is important enough that you don't want a low like sacred piece or a non like a basic piece. Like you're still chasing the ancestral items, but it's still really weird that they went with this route where armor is just the best thing in the game. It's so simple. It's stack armor, vulnerability, crit damage, and then that's it. It's like that's all. That's all in the game.
If it is a full breast-plated armor or it is a nightgown, it will still have the exact armor value. It'll be equivalent. It'll look completely different. It'll obviously shouldn't provide the same armor value. You know, slippers versus plate greaves. Nope. It's just based on the item power of the item. That's the only thing that matters. And no stat requirements. It feels really weird. I like the RPG fantasy of using gear that kind of makes sense, has a tie-in to reality.
I think it's like it is neat flavor, but this is one of the smaller problems in the game. I don't think this is a big enough issue where it warrants a change. I think if they want to keep it like this, it's fine. I think they really need to do something about armor and how it's just literally the best stat in the game.
Diablo 4's item system is completely detached from reality. I don't know if they'll fix that, but I think it would be nice if they did, because a lot of the aspects of Diablo 4 are quite successfully immersive. And finally, one of the biggest one for some of us, it is the level scaling. We talked about the level scaling in the initial review of Diablo 4.
Here we go.
And it was one where in the first few beta weekends, we leveled to like 25, and we noticed that after a certain few levels, our character would just get weaker and weaker. You start off the character without gear and without skills, your character sucks. You level it to 2, you get your first skill. Way, your character is so much more powerful now because you're actually using a skill. You level it to level 3, you unlock a core skill. Hey, your character is even more powerful now. Give it a couple more levels and your character actually has gear in most of its slots. And it's basically downhill from there. A level 6 sorcerer can one-shot the giant bears in Dry Hills, or Fractured Peaks, with chain lightning. You will never be able to do that again. You might be able to do that in like level 90 plus when you're chain lightning lucky procs like 2 other skills and you're using cooldowns because your cooldowns now have like 3-second cooldowns. But the bear will never die from a single chain lightning again. So this is like crazy to me. And to give you guys another example, some streamers who went in and just grinded level 100, their characters were so weak because they didn't do the glyphs. They had to go back and be carried by low-level characters because low-level characters were stronger versus the content. And if they party up, the low-level characters did more effective contribution to the party than the high-level characters. Again, it's really hard to wrap your mind around this. The truth of the level scaling mechanics is that even though most of us didn't like it, most of us thought it was an awful mechanic in the beta, now that we have experienced the rest of the game, I will say that it is in fact worse than we expected. The level scaling system continues to be extremely punishing up until when you start getting lots of Paragon points and are dealing with leveled up glyphs, which again is level 80s to 90s. The current fairly linear leveling curve means that that won't happen to you until over 100 hours into the game. If you want to play the game for over 100 hours, seeing your character get weaker every single time it levels, it will in fact, after that, start to change course ever so slightly.
I think it's like it's not like a linear relationship. Like I said, there are certain breakpoints where your gear significantly gets stronger, and you feel that power spike for a little bit, and that keeps you going. But because of how long it takes to go from 70 to 100, that feeling is going to go away in the mid-80s, mid-90s. And then it'll come back, I guess, after 100 when you finally like can start building your character more vertically. It feels really bad. And like I said before, because of how fast you can power through all the way to 70, because of the power spikes in your gear. And like at 70, I think at 72 all the way to like 75, I was killing like dungeons with level 84 monsters, like in the nightmare dungeons. At 80, I'm still killing those level 84 monsters, 85, 86, but it feels harder. It might depend on the nightmare dungeon, but the same monster, this isn't even scaling. It's just my character has not gotten stronger in six levels, even without the scaling involved. Because the Paragon board, like Zazarian said, like the final bits of the Paragon board, what's 5 strength times 4? Like, what's 20 strength? 20 strength is nothing. Relatively, it's nothing. And that's all you get for those, like, well, you get a little more, right? Because each level you get 4 Paragon points. But it's so small in the grand scheme of things. And it feels so bad. When you hit these important breakpoints, when you slot your glyph and you get your glyph working and get that special effect, sure, your character experiences a slight power spike. But then it's just like Kripp says, it's just all downhill from there. And these are issues that you're gonna feel. And even if you think the game is amazing all the way level 50, what, you pay $70 just to hit level 50 and then quit? That seems like a waste of money. You ask me, that seems like a waste of money. Let's hope season 1's better, but yeah, it's just right now. I think there needs to be some changes. The casual players, I guess if they never hit level 50, then whatever. But I think a lot of people are gonna hit it at this point. It's been over a week since early access, and I think a lot of people did play during early access.
So, yeah, there are other mechanics at play. 95 is the maximum open world and dungeon scaling. So if you level from 95 to 96, the monsters will not level up with you. You will in fact be stronger than them. There are also some exceptions to the level scaling system. The only one that really works, that I feel is actually pretty fair system, is the Nightmare Sigil system, which doesn't have level scaling. That's the fairest part of the game. If you want to deal with a higher level dungeon, you make a stronger character, and it doesn't matter what your level is. Like it's just a par difficulty. That's what I want. I want certain content to have a certain difficulty. Yes, the game has to naturally be harder as you level up because you want to increase the difficulty of the challenges, but the best way to do this is to increase the difficulty of the challenges just absolutely, regardless of your character, and have multiple challenges of varying difficulties. And then your job in an ARPG is to make a character strong enough to tackle the different levels of challenge, like the Nightmare Sigil system, but that has other problems. The overall level scaling in Diablo 4 feels to me like it is a really bad system, and then it has a whole bunch of band-aids to make it somewhat playable in the endgame. If we had a level scaling system like A to B, 1 to 100, it would actually work a little bit better for me, but the way that I see it is, it's not a very good system, and there are major cracks in how it can possibly work and keep the game together, and we already see some band-aids all over the place.
I feel like the dungeons that people are grinding for XP, if anything, all the other dungeons should have been buffed to match that instead of nerfed. And I don't think anyone finds the leveling realistically. I don't think it's that fun at this point. I think it's more tedious. And if you just want people with something to do, make an actual endgame then. Like, make more stuff like Nightmare Sigils where you can go higher if you want. Like, give players the option to pick their challenges, not the challenge player just for leveling up.
It's already starting to crack, and the game has been out for a week. That's what I'm saying. So
well, the rice is ready. If anyone wants to eat, come on over. I'll make dinner for you guys.
That's what I got. And again, I'd like to remind you guys that I'm still streaming. I'm still very much enjoying Diablo 4, but it's important to talk about the issues, honestly, especially because it seems like they're listening. Thank you for watching another Kripp video, and we'll see you next time.
And you guys can find Kripp on... Where's his Twitch? Yeah, so you guys can find Kripp here. Great guy. I love these videos because he gives his insight, and this is a guy that's very smart. He knows what he's talking about. Glad I could share my thoughts. Well, I saw this video and I wanted to do like a live reaction. I didn't want to watch it first and then go back over and give my thoughts. I think this format is definitely a lot better. It's more real from my end. Thank you for watching, and if you want to see me, my link should be below. And I hope you don't mind me reacting to your content, because it's good content, and hopefully I added and enhanced it.